successful at it is we can use, for example, tools. So something coming up behind us in the woods and we decide to fight, and we look to our right and we see this big, thick stick the size of our arm, we know that we can use that as a weapon. So we can quickly reach over and pick the stick up to use to fight whatever this is coming up behind us. So we kind of even the playing field a little bit. Right? We don't have claws, we don't have fangs, we don't have super strength, we don't have particularly super speed. So, how are you going to fight a cougar? Or a black bear, or whatever, any animal coming through those woods. The smallest of them could probably tear us apart, one-to-one. But because we have the ability to use this logos, this logic, this reasoning, we can put pieces together and even the playing field. Right? We can do this and this and make this. We have a big rock in our path and we don't have the strength to move it, but we know that we can take a stick and a rock, smaller rock, and make a lever and use that lever as a tool to move the big rock. And on and on and on, right up to nuclear fusion. We have the capability as humans to do stuff like that. Most animals don't. Not many animals use tools. A few of them, believe it or not, like crows. Do you know crows use tools? How creepy is that? You see a crow like hacking away at some roadkill. They can't crack the bone to get to the marrow. They'll pick up a rock and use a rock to crack the bone. That's creepy stuff. Monkeys can use tools to a degree. Apparently elephants can paint. I saw this the other day. Sell and have a paintbrush. Paint the picture. Damn, I can't do that. Paint the picture. It looked like an elephant painted the picture, but still, he painted the picture, for God's sake. He knew that using that brush, the point is not what he painted, the point is that he knew that that stick with that fuzzy bristle on the end could be dipped into this colorful stuff and put on this piece of ink, which is amazing. We take that stuff for granted, right, because we do it all that. So we are. We don't have any other way to level the playing field other than using tools. So it's something that we as a species share in common, this ability to reason, this ability to use logic to solve our problems, which is unique. Makes us good experiment, right? If we turn around and we pick up that stick and that thing behind us also picked up a stick, now it's like, uh-oh, they're also stronger. So now we might have to put a rock on the end of that stick and make one ball. Shard a piece of volcanic glass and then a sword or something. So if they have a sword, we bring a gun. If they have a gun, we bring nuclear weapons. Whatever, the point is, right, we can adapt and we can shift our usage of tools, if you will, to in whatever we have to learn, which is why we do that. Okay? So it's the reasoning side that makes us who we are. So it's the reasoning side that we want to tap when we argue. Because we know we can state reasoned ideas and have them be accepted regardless of how the other person feels about it. We don't want to argue emotion because, as I said, everybody has emotions and they're just as right as you are. Okay? So it's hard to argue emotions, but it's not hard to argue facts because a fact is a fact. This rock is hard. If I smash it against your head, you're going to lose consciousness and fall to the ground. In 99 cases out of 100, that's exactly what's going to happen. It's a fact. The rock is hard, your head isn't as hard as the rock. There it is. Okay. So we want to argue fact-based. We want to argue reason-based. Okay. So when we put our essay together and this is another reason we avoid the first person, okay? Because if you use the first person, okay, we want to argue this with this ratio, okay? 95% from the perspective of logic, and let's say 3% with emotion. Right. The other 2% will be ethos, which is a form of ethic, which is a form of credibility is our secondary sources, lending credibility to our argument. Remember we said before, when we started using sources, we're not experts in these fields. We can borrow these for use and use it in their stuff. That's what we do. That's this, the ethos. So 95% of your argument needs to be in logic and reason. The other 5% are pathos and ethos. Okay? The spices, if you will, of your argument. Your argument itself is the meat and potatoes of the stew. The salt, the pepper, whatever, that's the emotion stuff. Like when I used an exclamation point in the thesis. That was my small contribution to pathos. The rest of it was arguing facts. Generally speaking, pathos will come from tone. The words that you use, how to use them. And it comes naturally in the word. It's important about facts. Credibility is also forced, the ethos, because it's required. These three sources without people. And it roughly comes out to 95-5. 95% of your argument, 95% of your stew will be reason, logic, evidence based. Just think evidence, that's all, evidence. Okay. And the other will be your ethos. Okay. So we want to base our arguments in logic because it's the thing we all share. It's the most usable form. So what does that look like? These documents will tell you. Okay? And this little video, if you get a chance to watch this at home, watch it. It's funny as heck. We don't have time right this second, but it's persuasive methods in TV commercials. It talks about what they're using, whether they're using logic or emotion or a combination or whatever to persuade the audience to buy a product, which is essentially the same thing we're doing, right? We're arguing to persuade your audience to agree with you. But it has a lot of old commercials in it. And it's kind of funny to see Fred and Barney from the Flintstones smoking. It's funny to see these TV shows that were sponsored by Philip Morris. I love Lucy. They used to break in the beginning and in the middle. They didn't have commercials like they do today. They would have a guy standing there talking. Philip Morris was a sponsor of Marlboro cigarettes, was a sponsor for I Love Lucy. So the other guy standing there with a cigarette smoking. Philip Morris is throat comfort, I believe the expression. It's funny. Obviously before we knew smoking caused all kinds of nasty things. Back in the 60s and early 70s, everybody was cigarettes. They were smoking in the hospital. I remember I worked at a Radio Shack way back then. And I can remember still standing at the counter smoking, customers coming and smoking, ashtray push everything. It's part of life. Secondary smoke. There was no secondary smoke because everybody smoked. It was all primary. I remember as a little kid sitting around the kitchen table at my grandmother's house in a cloud of smoke. While all the adults were sitting around getting hammered. Drinking. Drank like fishes. So it's kind of funny to see that stuff, you know, as a part of like advertising on TV, literally. So if you get a chance, watch that movie. Let's look at this real quick, okay? This tells you kind of what we just talked about, okay? So here's logos, all right? And as you can see, it says it's logical appeal, a way of persuading an audience by reason. This appeal looks to logic when you rely on your audience's intelligence and when you offer credible evidence to support your argument. That includes facts, examples, anecdotes, precedent, authority, or reason, deductive and inductive reasoning. So here are some sentences that are based in logic, just to give you an idea. The data is perfectly clear. This investment has consistently turned a profit year over year in spite of market declines in other areas. It's going right to the argument of the day. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have not only the fingerprints, the lack of an alibi, a clear motive, and an expressed desire to commit the robbery, we also have video of the suspect breaking in. This case could not be more open and shut. Facts. We have facts. How do you argue facts? Here's a video of you breaking into the place. What are you going to say? It's not me. You could. That's what they mostly do. It's not me. But, whatever. Looks like you. Sure. Whatever. It's hard to argue. It's a matter of common sense that people deserve to be treated equally. The Constitution calls itself evident. Why then should I have been denied a seat because of my disability? More than 100 peer-reviewed studies have been conducted over the past decade. None of them suggest that this is an effective treatment for hair loss. History has shown us time and again that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So these are all things using facts and examples and anecdotes, in this case precedent. Precedent is very big in law. If you know anything about the legal system or you watch TV in the afternoon, that you know that lawyers will argue precedent all the time. Precedent is something that already happened. So the lawyer will say, "Look, Your Honor, in Brown versus Smith, the judge decided that blah 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 blah." And 9 times out of 10, the judge will take that precedent into consideration and say, "Okay, I'm the razor, all things being equal. It's yours. The answer is it's already given." And so he'll use the precedent to make a ruling. In other words, he's not going to reinvent the wheel. It was already decided, here it is, so I use the precedent to make my case. And that happens all the time. It's a time-saving thing, but it's also hard to argue. That's the idea. Now you'll see when I look in the next one, I look in the pathos, you'll see the difference. So that was the logic. That's our goal. This is the pathos. This is the passionate or emotional appeal, okay? Convincing an audience of an argument by creating an emotional response. This can work if it's not overdone. So the best way to incorporate pathos is by using words that carry appropriate connotation. What do we mean? Well, we have definitions of words, guys. We call those denotations. Okay. We also have implied meanings of words. We call those connotations. Denotations you can look up in a dictionary and see what the word means. Connotation generally relies on how the word's used, where it's used, when it's used, what culture it's being used in, etc., etc. So I could use a word here and now amongst us that has a completely different meaning than it would if you used it in a different situation at a different time with different people. That's the connotation. Connotation is what makes the language so hard to learn. Because imagine you're a second language speaker, right? Come in here and you have these words that mean 85 things depending on how you use them, where you're in the context of how you use them. It's very challenging to learn connotation. It's challenging for people who speak English natively to learn connotation. We have words that mean different things even if you go from neighborhood to neighborhood, let alone city to city or state to state or region to region. And connotation changes all the time. So, denotation refers to the dictionary definition of the word. Connotation refers to the word's secondary meanings, implications. For example, ladies, if you were to pick a word to describe you, would you choose slender, thin, or scrawny? How many would choose scrawny? How many would choose thin? How many would choose slender? How many can't hear me right now, and therefore I'm going to turn my question. Letter. You'd probably choose a word that didn't sound offensive. Scrawny is a little bit offensive. All these words mean the same thing, right? They mean, not heavy. They mean you're not heavy. But they have degrees of connotation. So scrawny means the same thing as thin. It means the same thing as thin. But when you say scrawny, it generally conjures up different images than the word thin. Scrawny like a chicken. It's a scrawny chicken. Whatever, that kind of thing. Versus thin, which, is in the middle. It can be or cannot be offensive, depending on how it's used. But slender tends to be a less offensive word, I guess. When you say someone is slender, you're implying a grace or beauty with that as well. So this is what we're talking about by certain words can convey the emotion you want to convey. You don't have to use whole sentences and stuff. Just the words that you use can convey. If I describe somebody and write a story and I describe somebody as scrawny, I don't like that person. On the other hand, if I describe them as slender, then I do like the person because I'm implying other things, positive things, more than just thin. Gotcha. That's what this says. A slender woman is graceful, elegant, and perhaps even sexy. Thin, on the other hand, is fairly neutral, and it lends women to prefer the word slender as it carries a more positive connotation. Finally, the word scrawny brings an unhealthy, overly thin or bony person. And women generally do not want to be described as scrawny. Same thing with men. You say that to everyone like you, but same thing with men. I don't want to be called scrawny. So the best way to incorporate pathos is by using words that carry appropriate connotation. And this is an example of that. The following is part of the first statement. I am not a crack addict. I am not a welfare mother. I am not illiterate. The words crack addict, welfare mother, and illiterate carry strong negative connotation in our society. Much better for the writer to use words that have weird connotations. I am not a person who abuses substances. I am not a parent who needs government assistance in my time of need. It's a little less edgy. I don't know what word you want to use there. It's a little less offensive. Right? You know, it's much better to talk about something in terms of somebody who abuses substances than it is to call them a crack addict or a crack addict. Whatever. It's much easier, or much nicer to talk about a parent who might need or not need government assistance, to say it like that, than it is to make some kind of slanderous, whatever, reference to the welfare system. And the same thing with being illiterate. It's connotation. Now, you have to be careful with this too. If you don't know the connotation, don't use it, because if you're wrong, you shoot yourself in the foot. So only play with connotation if you know how to play with connotation. So these are some of the sentences that appeal to pathos. If I read those logic sentences, see what the difference is. If we don't move soon, we're all going to die. Can't you see how dangerous it would be to stay? They're not telling you why. They're not giving you any kind of reason in terms of facts or things, right? They're not saying that rock above our head is getting loose and loose. It's going to fall in 10 minutes. What are they saying? They're saying if we don't move, we're going to die. They're going right to the emotion. A situation that could be used, and that could be the best way. Right? I'm not going to stand there and say, oh, there's a rock above our head on that shelf. It's growing more and more loose, and pretty soon it's going to break off and cause an avalanche. And that avalanche. By the time I say all that, we're dead. So I might just say, yo, we need to move now, we're going to die. So in a case like that, the emotion is more appropriate, right? The emotional appeal is more appropriate, right? I'm not just invested in this community, I love every building, every business, every hard-working member of this town. Again, it's more emotional than it is logical, right? I'm not giving you the reasons, I'm just telling you how I feel about it. There's no price that can be placed on peace of mind. Our advanced security systems will protect the well-being of your family so that you can sleep soundly at night. Pretty good salutation. But I'm not giving you statistics. I'm not telling you the frequency of the transmitters. I'm not telling you the sensitivity numbers of the window connects, those things. I'm just flat out telling you what's going to do for your family. Which in most cases in that situation, And that's exactly what people want to hear. Where would we be without this tradition? Ever since our forefathers landed on Plymouth Rock, we've celebrated Thanksgiving without fail, making more than cherished recipes, we make memories. We leave the tone of voice and music for these two. Give it an emotion, tone of voice, not just reading like a fact. It's meant to be read. So it has its place, guys. But very sparingly. If you wrote a whole essay like this in this language, you would wear your reader out. And sometimes in commercials, same thing. You can see commercials today that wear the reader out, like those SPCA commercials where they have the droning norm of a lot of music. Doing a real sad speech showing a little puppy in the chain in the snow. They go on for 10 minutes about how it's heartbreaking in the snow. It gets its point across, but it's a little emotionally right. Works better than the statistics would be if they just flash the screen up with numbers, 9 out of 10 shelter puppies, blah, 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 While it may convey what it wants to convey, it's not as effective. It's not going to make you reach for your wallet any faster than the emotion of the people. So that's the difference, guys. When we're writing, we want to stick with the logic. 95% to logic. So when you're working on your drafts this week, keep that in mind. Just keep evidence in mind. If you're using evidence, you're in the logic frame. Okay? Evidence, facts, examples, anecdotes, things like that. That's all evidence. Right? That's good. If you're using evidence, and you are, because you have to give 3 supporting points, I require you to use 3 pieces of evidence for your argument. Why are you saying that marijuana should be legal in Georgia? Reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. Evidence piece 1, evidence piece 2, evidence piece 3. Well, you're an English teacher. What the hell do you know about evidence for this stuff? I don't. This guy in Chicago does. Colorado does. Look, I used him as a source. I don't have the credibility on my own, but he does. So I borrow his credibility. Borrow his credibility and use that as my source to back up my evidence. Now my evidence is pretty good. Because for you to argue, you'd have to have somebody on the opposite side arguing the same thing with credibility as well. Otherwise, the person with the most credibility is going to win the argument. Questions? It's a lot of stuff, I guess. It really isn't as hard as it sounds when you dissect it like we just did. If you look at it as a whole, it's not hard. And again, this is something you do all the time. Don't get caught up in the terms. Don't get caught up in the process. Guys, you argue constantly. Even if it's just with yourself. Okay? We argue all the time. We're good at it. What's more, because we're humans and we have big brains, we're good at arguing from a logos perspective. So you kind of do this naturally. Okay? Just as you're putting it down on paper / computer. Just make sure you're aware of, the little nitty-gritty things. Okay? When you first come up with your rough draft, guys, don't worry about any of this stuff. Just get it out, right? The first time you get it out, you just want to get all the info out of your head and into the computer. Then you can go back and see what we did. Fix it and polish it. That's why I said, write your stuff, go back and add transitions when it's done. Because it's easy, not hard. Go to the paragraph and see